16 hours.
Yeah, that'll never happen.
And then is that official or is that?
I mean, I don't see any new governance documents that say that. So, I mean, unless he's absent, then I can post the date. But otherwise,
Yeah.
we can still get it all here.
Okay. I will hold tight.
I think if Paul's comfortable doing it remote and as an attendance, that's fine. It's not that well.
And then if, just if, so Paul, we just have to get the digital signature for that stuff.
Paul may have been here an hour ago.
Oh, my thumbs out right now.
There he is.
Like clockwork.
Hey, Natasha,
Changed it up.
I moved you over so you can see the TV.
And so the people on the TV feel like it's like an inquisition. When you say you've got him, we're gonna go.
He's on.
Okay.
He hasn't turned his camera on or his microphone on yet.
There he is.
There we go.
Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, Google says it's 4 o'clock. Let's call this meeting to order. Paul, are you good being secretary where you are, or would you like someone here to handle it?
If you could, that might be easier.
That would make Nate the next senior member, so. Nate, can you call the roll?
You bet. Ebro?
Here.
Capua? Capua?
Here.
Tompkins?
Here.
O'Reilly?
Here.
Felke?
Here.
Peschel?
Here.
And Miller? Here.
Thank you. Nick, was the meeting appropriately noticed?
Yes. Notice was sent to various media outlets and posted at the utility, the library, and City Hall, as well as online on the city website.
Thank you. Public comment period. At this time, the commission would recognize members of the public who would have a desire to address the commission. Do we have any members of the public here today? Seeing none. Number 4, commissioner and staff comments. Commissioners, any comments before we get going? None. Any staff comments today?
Yes, we have a couple. First, let John start.
Yes, we are into our lead and copper testing for this quarter, and we have to get 60 samples this time as opposed to the 30 we've gotten in the past. We have 24 of those back, and so far we've seen very positive results. 23 of the 24 have been below the action level, and remember our goal is we're shooting for 90% to be below the action level, so we're sitting very nicely with still 36 samples yet to go. And this first round has to be done by June 30th, so we do have some time here yet.
Thank you.
And then Melissa for a couple items.
Yep, so I have 2 items. First one, just this past week, we did host our annual business customer brat fry. We served about 900 brats, and that was 31 different businesses and city departments that were served. Who signed up. Participants that ranged from, we had some small nonprofits, so I think our smallest group was 4, up to several larger corporations or organizations, and really gave us a good opportunity to show our appreciation throughout the community. So if any of you were able to get a brat, I hope you enjoyed it. And second, just as part of our strategic initiatives, we've really been focusing on educational engagement, the expansion of our youth apprenticeship and internship opportunities. We've really been making strong progress. We've been building relationships with a variety of area schools. We've been offering job shadows. In fact, we had 3 students today that came and shadowed with our line crew. We participate in a variety of events, such as last week we were at the Youth Apprenticeship and Registered Apprenticeship Showcase that Mid-State held, and currently we actually offer 5 different youth apprenticeship positions. Up to this point, our involvement for such as job shadows and apprenticeships has really just been limited to the Marshfield schools, our Marshfield high school, but our engagement at all of those area events really does encompass all of the area schools around that participate in that. So we now are trying to expand our efforts in developing stronger connections with those schools when it comes to the job shadows and the youth apprenticeships, and really the ability to focus on these initiatives. It's supported by having a really engaged team. It takes everyone, including having dedicated human resources staff to be able to lead and coordinate those school outreach and event activities throughout the year. So it's going good.
Thanks for the update.
Welcome.
And then just lastly, just a reminder, the value of the utility presentation, we're tentatively scheduled to complete that with the Common Council on May 27th. So if you're able to attend that night, that'd be great. I believe the meeting time is normally at 6 o'clock, so expect it to be back on the time.
Great. Moving on, number 5, employee service recognition.
Yes, tonight we recognize Kelly Pilsner. She is celebrating 10 years of service. Actually celebrated it yesterday, May 11th. She first started in our office team and is currently the administrative assistant for both the electric and water departments.
Okay. Very good. Number 6, private side lead replacement bids.
Yes, I'm going to turn it over to John to kind of lead us through this one.
Take it away, John.
Okay. As you know, since 2016, we've been doing a public or private side lead service program, and it's been generally entirely DNR funded or public or private side funded combo. We've been doing that, like I said, since 2016. So this last time when we applied for funds, we decided that, okay, these last people that are being hard to get, we're going to try to force their hand a little bit. We put it together all as a one bid project for one contractor. So we bid all 92 services for one contractor. We held that bid just recently. It was won by Van Wright Plumbing out of Green Bay for $599,300, which is entirely covered by a combination of the DNR funding, as you saw on the chart, plus the $32,500 that you guys had pledged back, and I think it was March, to come up with the 25% other for those districts that didn't have the full principal forgiveness. I reached out to a couple of people that I'm familiar with through the WIOA section. The general manager of Green Bay has used Van Wright for 3 years for their private side lead service program, and they highly recommend them. They're currently working in Manitowoc. So Rob Michelson, the general manager there for the water utility, I talked to him, and he's loving the work they're doing. They both said you're in good hands with them, so we, as part of the recommendation going forward here, is to recommend that we continue in contract with them and go forward with meeting the DNR requirements to proceed with that.
So keep in mind, though, this is a little bit different than a normal bid, right? Normally we'd be bidding for some type of improvement for utility-related infrastructure. Here we're doing this on behalf of the private side, the customer, to help facilitate it and move that needle forward. So as you can see the write-up, John put together the information that we had, and then the recommendation is to move forward with Van Wright for this agreement that the utility will hold. That agreement will have outlets and opportunities, or options, I should say. We're not locked in by any means, but also then it's all contingent on the approvals that are still needed. So we still need to come forward with approvals for the various funding from the DNR. We're still working with bond council to get all that in place, so that'll be forthcoming in the months to come.
Okay. Can I get a motion before we start discussion?
I move to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Second by Nick. Now, go ahead.
So this is private side. Is this the part that comes to their property or is on their property?
Generally on their property.
Oh, great. Because one of the things I heard from the people in my district who still had lead was they said, we just can't find anyone to do it. Like no one will do it for us. I heard that a lot. So what happens if you approach someone and say, hey, this is completely covered, we found the contractor, basically we're just handing you the service, and they say this is a terrible time, we don't want it done, we're moving houses or something.
Right, well, I think as we come forward with the other, the legal or the financial side of this, another piece of the puzzle is that ordinance for the city common council to consider mandatory replacement. Because ultimately we're on this time clock that we have to get replaced. So that's going to be the other piece that we're trying to couple together. So I think while we recognize the situation, that's why we're trying to bring everything forward from the property owner. I believe that this doesn't preclude the property owner from saying, hey, I want to use this contractor and do this. They can definitely do that, but ultimately the funding and stuff will be handled differently, correct, John? Mm-hmm. So it won't be quite as simple, but it's possible.
Yeah, we would have to go back to the DNR and get some different approvals, because then you'd have to have a pre-qualified list, which we did have in the past, but we'd have to do some re-notifications to get a new pre-qualified list and go down that path. So there would be some different hoops to jump through, but we could make that happen, yes.
To your point, they're having a tough time finding contractors. So, and we did reach out to the local ones, trying to get them to partake, but obviously there's just resources. We're all managing as best we can. So we think this is a good solution, and hopefully will help expedite the replacements.
One of the biggest reasons we went this route this time was the last 2 years that we had a program before we took that break was we were 100% principal forgiveness. We were paying for everything, and these last 92 were kind of stick in the mud, wouldn't do it. So putting it all in one contractor's bonus hand, so to speak, trying to get everything together and get it done in one fell swoop here and be done with the private side, hopefully, going forward.
And remind me, what's the date we have to get all of this done by? Is there a certain...
Well, in this contract, I put to the end of 2026 construction season. There is no terminal date to the funding, but it will be locked into that contract date. Now, talking with Van Wright, unless something, dangerously goes wrong, they think they can do the project in about 6 weeks and be done and out of here. And so they would be done, they kind of said maybe like a July 1st start date. They could be out by mid-August then.
First of all, I love the fact that you guys went and got funding for this, and I love the fact that you packaged this to make it easy for everybody. If we don't have the mandatory replacement ordinance from the council, and you have, let's just pick a random number, 3 households that don't move forward, how does that change the timeline on the lead replacement mandate from the state?
Well, it wouldn't change the timeline at all, with the exception until we get to the very end. At some point, those last 3 holdouts, we're going to beg, borrow, steal, have to get them. However we got to make it happen, we're going to have to make it happen. So the ordinance, we will, at some point, is going to become a necessary evil unless we can get everybody on board. Okay. Now, we have to do a minimum of 100 a year. Combining the private side, currently we're sitting around 700, so we have about 7 years to get that done. The only time I'm told we can get anything less than 100 is in that final year. At that point, that final year, we'll have to have the ordinance if there's private side holdouts, if we're not just waiting on our side. So we'll need that then for sure. But if they hold out at this moment right now, it's not going to really harm anything other than giving us some heartburn trying to get it done.
And at the present pace that you're doing the public side, the utility side ones, how many years do you forecast to take that?
Well, we are trying to get 200 done this year.
Okay.
If we could get 200 this year, then we have about 3 years left of the program on the utility side. Now, I'm anticipating that might be 4, because some of those might be hard to get, like Central Avenue might take a little bit longer. So, last year we might have those to go yet, so we're looking at 3 to 4 on our side.
Okay. Gabrielle?
It's not super clear to me based on how it's written in the packet if this is going to be completely covered by that safe drinking water loan program. So I just wanted to see if someone could just kind of touch on how this would be paid for.
Well, if you're in, let me grab the memo here. If you are in districts, okay, if you are in districts 103 or 106, it's 100% covered by the DNR funding. If you are in any of the other 3 districts, there's that 75% principal forgiveness, the DNR is funding, and then the commission out of their designated funds back in March are contributing the remaining, in that remaining cost category. That's what you guys have pushed to the table for those other 3 districts so that they are on the same wavelength as everybody else.
I think, Gabrielle, if you look at that chart, you can see at the bottom left it says we were awarded essentially $638,750, and the bid that we received from the contractor is just over $599,000. So you can see about $39,000 delta there that should help. And obviously, there are some, there could be, what's the word I'm looking for? Extras, if you will, or, generally. So we have some room in there to hopefully make sure that we don't have any issues or any shortfall.
And the caveat is if we spend at least 85% of this funding, we can apply in future years for other funding if we find we need it down the road. So if we don't get like those 3 you mentioned, if we don't get them now, we can apply for funding again later on to try to get them again in the future. As long as we spend at least, I think it's 85% of this.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any other questions? We have a motion and a second to approve this. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Time out. I'm sorry. We have online visitors, so we have to do this with a voice vote. Nate, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Let's see. Tompkins,
Aye.
Bechtel,
Aye.
O'Reilly,
Aye.
Ebrel,
Aye.
and let's see. I'm going to abstain just because my brother is a potential subcontractor.
Fair.
And Gabrielle
Aye.
and Kaplan.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes. Thank you. Number 7, Commission Governance Review for the last time this year.
Well, I don't know if I say the last time.
We think. All right. Starting with number policy 1030, Commission Common Council Relationship and Roles. Did anybody have any suggested edits as they went through this? Yes? Natasha?
Well, and I don't know if it's here, but if it's not here, I think we should either find it or add it to some policy. So this is just, and we can have a discussion about it, but I felt like this that I'm thinking would be good to add also connects with 1050. So we have to kind of keep 1050 in mind where it says, or no, maybe it's not 1050, it's 1045, where it says we promote a sense of partnership, trust, and mutual respect. That's not in this one. But I felt like part of the commission's role that we maybe should discuss if this is a commission role is to ensure that the pricing and fees to the city for services are fair and reasonable. I feel like that should be something that the commission is overseeing, especially since sometimes this gets lost, and then as a council person, I hear complaints about pricing and fees, so it would just be something that would be good to have oversight with.
Can you say that again, just so I can get it, make sure I got it right?
To ensure pricing and fees to the city for services are fair and reasonable.
Okay, that's a suggestion. Thoughts, comments? Mike?
I'm just never a fan of subjective stuff in these policies. I don't disagree with the concept of it, but I don't know, anything that's subjective in these always seems to create a problem down the road, so I don't know if there's a different way to phrase it, or who is it fair to? You know,
The fair and reasonable is the subjective part.
Correct.
As is insured. If it was reworded as every other year review, pricing and fees,
Something like
I
that.
don't know that, the theory is that
Yeah.
you review it to be fair and reasonable, but it doesn't say it. Are fees and services between the city and the utility one way?
Fees and services between the city and
Does
utility.
the city provide us services that we pay them for?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we pay the city, we pay part of the inspector's wages annually, 25% of those. We are, recently the change to the permits, or changes in those fees drastically increased our costs from about $10,000 or $12,000 to like $50,000 or $60,000 a year in fees.
So the point is that
Sorry.
it's both ways. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
get down in the weeds, but I mean, policy-wise, it's both ways. And I don't know if the council has a manual or policies that deal with this kind of stuff, so I don't know. It would be impossible for us to write that it'd be two sections in just our manual. But I think that those fees for services should be looked at in both directions.
Yeah,
I broaden what you say.
Yeah, for sure. Like when we did permits, our permits would be for everyone. So then it would be considered fair because everyone gets the same pricing. But to Mike's point, I hear you on that. Like part of me wanted to say, to make sure that costs are covered, but the utility isn't making a profit off the city. Just because I feel like that's double burdening our citizens because they are not only paying utility fees, but if the utility is making a profit off the city, they're basically making a profit off the taxpayers. So that would be very clear, but I was like, I don't know, lawyers always want very ambiguous stuff. But I do feel like there needs to be oversight on some of that, and not just because our relationship with the city is a sort of the symbiotic relationship. It's not just a regular customer. So
I would use your words in reverse, because the fees that you're talking about are being charged to all of the customers that are receiving that service. So regardless if they're a city or a private industry, in the same way that the permits are being applied to us. So there is some, I guess if you deem the reasonable and fair, being that everyone pays the same amount for fees, we're using that same structure for the charges that we provide internally and externally for our services for broadband.
So this policy is about our relationship with the city and not with our relationship with other customers. So I do feel like it's a unique relationship.
I just don't understand how you would charge permits equally to everybody, but then when it comes to our charges, they wouldn't be equal.
Well, that would be a really interesting conversation to have. Yeah.
Paul, Gabrielle, anything to add to this?
It just seems to me that, again, it gets kind of confusing, because to say that we couldn't make a profit based on what? Our cost? The cost to everybody? The cost to the city? To me, it's more confusing than it is not.
Historically,
The
how
one
have...
thing-
Oh, go ahead, Gabrielle.
The one thing that I was going to say is, I wasn't sure, Natasha, if you were talking about fees between the city and utility, but if there's any, reference in terms to the fees that are being charged to the customers, I think that's where we can refer back to the guidelines that we have in place, where we can't, do like rate increases and that sort of thing without approval. That's the only thing that I was thinking.
Yeah, obviously electric and water rates, you as a body approve going in for adjustments, but ultimately those rates were set at the state, and we don't have the ability to treat it.
Yeah, policy is the, and the common council share the responsibility for ensuring the effective MU governance for the benefit of the stakeholders, and it names the
So they're in the general, and you're saying doesn't
Right.
necessarily need to be called out.
right. It's written that way so that you don't have to have every specific
You have to
thing.
have a box to check every year.
Yes,
Okay.
listed.
How are those rates between for the services back and forth set today? I mean, are they, does staff sit down and talk about them? Are they just arbitrary on both sides?
I mean, each one of them has a different process, tool, and history behind it.
Got it.
You know, the compensation for the position, that dates back to even before I started at the utility. And this has always been the same way. I've tried to make changes through the years, but just given various components, it's not easy to make that change. As far as like our broadband charges, we about 10 years ago looked at a private industry and what they were charging for similar services, and used that as a benchmark, and then basically had a very small inflationary increase set to that, and then all customers were standardized on that rate structure. Permit fees, obviously, that's set at the city level. We don't get any input into that. Trying to think of any other ones off the top of my head. Most of the items, like if it's based on a cost of service, so like if we ask for some assistance from streets or we provide some assistance to streets, there's some type of cost of service, whatever their standard rates are, or our rates are, would be used or charged. I don't know, Tony or John, anything I'm missing, or you guys can think of?
Yeah, we'll work with wastewater at times, and whatever their standard charge out is for their vacuum excavator truck, we just pay that, and then the labor that they would charge out. They would just send an invoice across, and then we charge it out to whatever job order or maintenance account it's being used for. So doesn't happen every day, but regularly enough. Sometimes they've got better equipment to do a certain job than we might have in-house. So.
Yeah, same with us. The wastewater tests our effluent from the treatment plant for the sanitary bill. We pay for that service. We use the street department many times to set up traffic control for us. And there are some times where they will do a pavement patch for us, like on Central Avenue, where it becomes time is of the essence type of thing, where they will do it and then just bill us for the time and materials as well.
So there's a pretty long established history of basically just charging the going rate for whatever each entity has, is what I hear.
Yeah, the problem is that like the PSC takes care of electric and water, but we have no governing body looking at the rates that are being charged for the communications utility or for billing for wastewater. There's no governing body doing that. We aren't doing that. And so I feel like we need to put it in there because there's, otherwise, maybe internally it's being done, but I feel like as a governing body, there needs to be some, like at least we need to be seeing that.
I would say on wastewater, ultimately, it's basically taking the electric, or the water portion and dividing it in two. So the charges for our billing services, our EMI system that's associated with water, half gets charged to to water and half gets charged to wastewater.
Pretty formulated.
Yeah, and everything is application based. Like it starts out with electric meters and water meters, and ultimately that's a 1/3, 2/3, and then that 1/3 that's water gets split 1/3 water, 1/3. I'm sorry. That 1/3 gets 50% into water, 50% into wastewater, based on if it's AMI to read the meters, if it's new meters, if it's our billing staff, setting up bills, the software for billing, those types of things. So I mean, if you want to get into the weeds, we definitely can. It just that's the general behind it.
Yeah, so what you're saying is there's a pretty standard approach to that too.
Yeah.
The piece about the broadband pricing, I think that the way you stated that differently rings a little bit differently with me, that we as a commission don't ever really review what pricing standards are across the whole broadband utility. It doesn't belong in this policy when I think about it that way. But as an oversight, when we talk about whether to have a rate case for electric or for water, we never address whether to have a rate case for broadband. And that would make more sense for the commission to look at on some basis.
And I just don't know what policy that would be in, but.
I don't know what policy would be in either, but we can figure it out. Other thoughts? Nick?
I agree with Nick said, and just to add to that, it could be also covered under number 3, withholding the joint meetings between, I mean, that could be resolved through that avenue. And the other part of the concern is basically a double tax or charging the city for a service and making profit off it. And then the same could be said about the pilot payment is really all profit to the city. And so there's different things back and forth that they're making money on potentially too.
So from all this discussion, I think what I hear is that the original wording that was thrown out, we don't necessarily need, but that we should look at a way to do a broadband rate case review similar to a way that we do with electric and water on a periodic basis at the commission level. And I don't think that gets into what individual customers pay. That's just what prices for broadband are, like we do for electric and water.
And I think that, you know, when we get down to 1045 about promoting a sense of partnership, trust, and mutual respect, I think it would be lovely to have these two organizations say, hey, let's have a relationship where we bill you for our cost, materials, and depreciation, and, you know, because we are together. And both sides, I think that would be very fair, and I think it would be reasonable. But those need to be discussions.
Not policies.
Well, then policies come out of it.
Right. So, no action on 1030. But Nick, you made a note about the broadband rate case piece. Did you have something on that, Paul, before we move on? Disagreement, maybe?
No, not a disagreement at all. But on number 6, if you read through it, it says to the Common Council through commissions. Shouldn't it be commissioners who also serve on the Common Council?
Well, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The very last one.
Yeah, the very last line of that.
Thank you, Paul.
Yep.
All right. Number 1040, commission compensation. Did anybody see anything in this one that needed any adjustment?
The amount needs to be changed.
So the amount needs to be updated to what the council did? Okay. What else do you see?
Is there a guideline for what is considered reasonable for meals and tips?
There is not a policy that I'm aware of for reasonable.
Subjective stuff again.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that has gone through a lot of evolutions through the years, especially even at a staff level. You know, we've had prescribed levels at one point, but then, you know, it's where you're at, the circumstances of where you're at, and trying to fit a policy or a number to fit with everything, or fit exactly. I think internally at a staff level, we generally use the
Per diem.
the per diem, the federal per diem suggested numbers generally, but obviously there are circumstances where it might change or sway one way or the other.
Natasha?
Is this the policy that should state that council members will not receive this reimbursement?
That's a good point.
Good catch. Council commissioners to start off. Other thoughts or questions? So we'll make those two changes. Number 1045, governing style. Who wants to kick it off? Natasha?
Oh, I thought it was fine.
Anybody else on 1045? 1050, delegation to the general manager. Natasha?
This might just be a matter of protocol and not policy, so I'm just clearing this up. Because one time I called John about questions about orthophosphates because we were going through that whole thing, and I was like, well, I need to, and I just, ask a lot of questions and try to understand stuff. But then I noticed that then I got a call from Nick, because John must have called Nick to call me, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I just wasted 2 people's time. So I don't know what works better for internally, but I just felt like I'd go to the guy who knew, but do you prefer that it all comes through you, Nick, or is that kind of, you could delegate to other people, or what do you want to do with questions? This has nothing to do with...
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and answer that for him. There is actually a policy
About
that
questions?
talks about commission communication with staff members.
Okay, so that's a different policy.
It's a different policy,
Okay.
but it does walk through that we spent a
Okay.
long time when we were writing that as we talked about what that protocol should be.
Great.
Yes.
Maybe you could
You
send
could
it
summarize
to
it.
Yeah, just some history there. I guess everything should flow through the general manager in some way. So, ideally, it would be in that circumstance, if it's an email, just CC me, knowing that John might be the proper person to answer the questions. If it's a voice call, trying to have all 3 of us on it or something, I guess. It's not to preclude you from being able to get the information. That's not the intent. It's obviously just trying to make sure that there isn't something going behind my back, if you will. And I'm not saying it was, but just that's why it's written that way.
It also goes back to the fact that the way the ordinances and the policies are written, Nick is the only person directly reportable to the commission. So without Nick's involvement, you might not get what you need.
And then just the other aspect of it is that ultimately, to that point, we have all the things going on operationally. We have the strategic plan and all the activities that our teams are trying to work on. And if there's somebody coming in and saying, hey, what about this, and why aren't you doing this, or why don't you work on this, obviously that disrupts the flow, and they might need to spend 10% of what they're doing working on something for you, and I'm expecting them to provide some results, and they're not.
Yeah,
I'm like,
I
well,
was
I'm
just
working
giving
for
a
them.
question.
Yeah.
It was definitely not giving tasks. I was just had
Yeah,
questions.
no, totally.
It's a good question. It's one of the places where the way the utility operates is more like a business than the way the city operates as a government. Any other questions or comments on that one? No? Good one. Number 1055, Commission General Manager Responsibilities. Changes, thoughts? number 1060, general manager accountability. Goes to what we were just saying about the general manager being the only person accountable. And then is the utility restricted fund coming back, or is that on a separate item? That's the next one. All right, so we've got a couple that you gotta make a couple changes on that we'll see again. If nothing else on that, moving on to number 8, strategic plan utility restricted fund. Last month, we asked you to make a bunch of, incorporate a bunch of changes, which you did.
Right. So we took the feedback that you, and tried to frame funds more clearly into 3 different buckets. So we have the restricted funds, which are essentially those that are restricted by external requirements, unrestricted, which are funds that are used to kind of support day-to-day or short-term and near-term operational requirements, and then utility designated funds, which are limited internally by the commission through policy. Then within each, we tried to identify specific funds, if you will. We were purposefully in keeping these funds broad and try to keep them, provide the buckets that you guys kind of talked about, but try to keep them broad just to reduce administrative costs and to remain flexible. My thought was to support the discussion. We could kind of go through the red lines to get your feedback. However, if you have a different way you want to route through this or drive into this one, feel free to go.
Do your questions that you're asking in discussions follow the red lines?
No, they do not. My thought process is this is going to take multiple meetings for us to kind of step through this. So the red lines are kind of taking what you guys talked about last month, hopefully incorporating them. And then the questions are really next. All right, we need to layer on these additional components. So the questions we're just hoping to start some conversation.
So I would say let's see who's got some pushback on any of the red line stuff first, and then we'll see what kind of discussion time we have left for that. So if you start with the red lines at the beginning and just shout out who's got an issue on the first page of that.
I think the substantive change there was really looking, and one of the issues that we've seen with cash, trying to figure out our cash on hand, is that when you do 2 years, volatility from one year to the next can create changes. So we end up with X days this year, and then next year we do a calculation, and now we've actually increased by 20 or dropped by 20, so going to 3, hopefully we'll help levelize or smooth that effect a little bit.
I like that.
And then I guess moving on to the second page, the top of the second page, just reframing that wording as far as our dates and numbers. I don't think we have to necessarily discuss at this point just exactly the numbers, but I think it's something we do need to talk about as we go forward as far as what are the targets that we're trying to shoot for as far as the numbers of days.
You mean within that 120 to 300, or you're saying the 120 and the 300 are up for discussion?
I would think that anything's on the table for you guys. I think those are good spots to start, and obviously there's some history behind those and some rationale there, but definitely and maybe once the funding gets framed, maybe some of that will become intuitive, or maybe not.
So let's place a marker there on the 120 and 300 if there's consensus on that when we get to the end, or if we have to come back to that.
So then kind of jumping into the buckets, if you will, of the different funds. So first we have the restricted fund. We add a little definition or a summary statement, if you will, there, just to say that it's really, bond covenants, state, federal law, public service commission are really who's driving that. And then ultimately those funds are not part of the cash on hand because obviously they're required externally. We can't rely on them to help support operational needs. So that was kind of the thought process there. And then debt service fund and debt service payment were kind of looped in together, so we separated those out to be definitively 2 separate ones. So one of them is the bond covenants requires the debt service fund. The debt service payment is where we're basically taking cash every month, representative of principal and interest into a special holding account, so that when the payments are due, we can deplete the funds and continue the process. And then the construction funds and the main replacement funds are what they were before. With the only small caveat is to the main replacement for the water. We did add a sentence at the end that this amount will change with future rate cases. So the most recent rate case that we went through, Public Service Commission's indicated as we do simplified rate cases in the future, that 580 will increase with whatever percentage increase is going on. So just notes that. So there might be some cleanup in this as we make rate cases in the future, but I think we just haven't captured for now.
Last time there was some discussion about whether we needed the construction, not the construction fund.
Yeah.
That's the customer where the customer donates deposits.
Yeah, you're right. We did. You're right.
Did you have any internal discussion about whether that was going to be a use it or not use it?
To be honest, I think I missed that in my notes. So if the commission would like, we definitely could. I think the consensus last time was to remove that one, to remove, or maybe.
Sorry, this one is for bond proceeds. The other one was like a customer.
Okay, it's a different.
Yeah,
Thank
like
you.
this one, construction funds, is for each new bond issue when we have.
So that's where the money sits, between when you get the bond
Yeah.
proceeds and got it.
Sorry.
Yeah, later on I do see the other one that's crossed out. So
Thanks for chiming in.
yes.
Okay.
Then we get into unrestricted funds. So these are kind of the funds that can be used. They're partly cash on hand and more for normal day-to-day type operations. So within restricted funds, you have two different buckets. One is working funds, and the other is other funds. So your working funds are basically our checking and savings account, which we have with Forward Bank, and the LGIP is the state account that we use as well. The other funds, as you can see, there's two of them. One is kind of a unique, not a lot of dollars, but it's our petty cash that we use in our drawers for our staff to take payments. And then the other is the other type of investments. And this is where it gets a little confusing, is that let's say we have 150 days of funds in our unrestricted. We need 120 to meet our working fund at the top. So that means you have 30 days left of cash that then could go into the other fund and be invested. So
it's just giving you a bucket to know what can be invested and what's held in the bank, essentially.
Well, I think this is a bigger discussion, and maybe later on. It's just within each bucket how, even in a commission restricted or designated fund, how much of that could be invested in LGIP, how much of that could be in long-term or 3 to 5 year CDs.
So back to the investment policy.
Correct. Like where is that? How liquid are the funds in all of the different areas versus being invested? So that's a whole other discussion as well. But maybe a layer once we get a little bit further down. So that's why the other types of investments is there. So if we have funds, have additional unrestricted funds beyond the 120, it gives us an opportunity to invest some of those in a different type of.
So that's where we see the current list of CDs for some of them.
Right, you could, yeah.
Because some of them are part of these other funds.
Correct, yeah. If we have more than 120 days within the unrestricted fund area, there could be some investments done.
Okay.
As of today, I'm not saying it's what it has to be, but that's just how it's set up. And then the last grouping is the utility designated funds. I know last time we talked about restricted versus designated. Patty did reach out to our auditor. They don't, from their perspective, the wording is our choice, really. They would just note it as they do. It would being utility designated or restricted doesn't impact how they do the accounting or the audit. And so these are basically those funds that you guys are going to designate to help support various things that is listed there. And then you can see the first one is kind of a unique one. It's not per se really commission, but I couldn't find a better spot to put it. And it relates to the cafeteria plan for our staff. It's really funds that our employees have put into the cafeteria to support the different medical or dependent care expenses. So it had to be captured, so it just is showing up there.
So they used to be under working funds.
Correct. And then I moved it to restricted because designated because it has a specific purpose to it.
So this is also, is each one of these sub-funds going to be this is or isn't in the cash on hand?
Yeah, the asterisk ones are the ones that are not included in the cash on hand.
Okay, so this moves it out of the cash on hand designation by putting it down here.
Yeah.
This was one of the things I think you were asking about last time, wasn't it, Nate? Okay.
So then we moved on to the maintenance fund for M1, which is essentially the same with a little cleanup edits there. And then the customer contributions fund, which is the one that we removed. And then here's, I think the pilot reserve fund was the one that was asked to be moved into a restricted area or designated area and not be included as part of the cash on hand calculation. And then next four are really the new four, if you will. So first is the economic development fund, which is kind of a replacement for the commission designated fund. And maybe that's too restrictive or more too limited. But I guess it is a means to provide a funding opportunity for us to help support projects like we have in the past, like the pickleball and the greasy park and such. Next is the depreciation fund. So this is really to help replace existing capital assets that are more than 7 years. Normal things that are being replaced on a year-to-year, every 2 years, that's being captured in the existing capital budget process. 7 years is chosen because really between a couple of years, then you go to like 20 or 30 or 40 years before we're generally replacing assets. So that's why 7 years was chosen. Except for the information, the IT equipment there, we have there's 5 years to help match with what that equipment type is and provide some examples.
And is the theory on this that you're trying to capture the delta between what the historical cost of it was and what the future replacement estimate might be?
I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is, Tony's for electric, for instance, has $2 million to spend on capital when he has capital projects annually. And next year we decided to replace a substation transformer, which is a once in every 40 or 50 years. That's a $1 to $2 million expense. Obviously that would kill his budget. So this fund is something as part of the budget process where we would know that we want to replace this transformer and that we're going to use funds out of this fund to help cover that. And that's kind of the thought process that as we talked about it as a team level.
Okay.
And the maintenance fund, the next one is essentially the same thing except from an O&M perspective. So if we're going to paint a water tower, water towers are every 20, 25 years, so that would be one. The filter stand replacement that we just did for the water treatment facility. Again, those projects that don't happen very frequently, but when they come up, they hit our cash flow, and this would help provide a funding source instead of it eating into the budget completely. And then finally is the future project funds, which again is so this is more for new projects, basically capital or O&M that were not included or we haven't experienced. And these kind of goes back to, I think it was unforeseen mandates or regulations was a topic of last meeting's discussion, so that's where this would fall in. Basically something comes up like PFAS that we hadn't thought about or considered, this provides a funding opportunity for it. This is a point where you could really get into a lot of detail if you wanted to. I mean, we could set up a sub-account for lead, a sub-account for this, a sub-account for that. While we could do that, I would probably lean towards not, just because it gets so detailed. It's a lot more administrative for Patty and her team to track, obviously for reporting and everything else, and just provide flexibility.
Well, this pretty well captures what we talked about last time. How do you like it now that you see it in writing? What's the next evolution, the next change we want to see in it? Natasha?
I'm wondering if, and I really like how these funds have been broken down, and I think it will also, we talked about last meeting, how sometimes we look at all of the investments, and if they're in different funds, it's just clearer for everyone, so I think that's really, for the depreciation
Good as a starting point, and now it'll be interesting to see how we filled them out. I mean, how we allot to each
one fund, at least how I have it written right now, and I guess that's these uses, it's possible we could see a downgrade because you look at it. Obviously, it's multi-layered, right? So there's our rating as a utility. That's one step. Then obviously we fit into the city's rating as well. So we have to be conscious that any, if we, drop to consider one of our holdings, that could have a double whammy to some degree.
But our reclassifying this isn't going to change the way the rating agency looks at it based on what you just said.
Correct.
Okay. So whether we put it in our internal cash on hand or not, they're going to do their own thing.
Correct, yeah, even though you might exclude it, or we might exclude it from our calculation, like the pilot reserve fund, because obviously we know that fund has to flow. Moody's is going to say that's not applicable from their perspective, or not, they would include that in their calculation.
Yes, Nate?
One thing I didn't see on here was the customer, what was it on that customer?
It's customer contributions right above pilot, and they've X'd it out, saying they won't use it.
Customer deposits more, so 234,000 as a liability on the balance sheet.
So that's the deposits that customers have to make when they sign up for new service.
That's different than what this is.
Are they job?
The advances.
Oh, they are, that's not the,
Advances, is that what you're saying?
Well, let's see. So in the liabilities, it says customer deposits 234,000.
Yeah, that would make customers then.
And since it's just in the liabilities, those funds would count towards the cash on hand, the 120 and the 300, even though it's not our money.
seems kind of high compared to the projects that I can think of that are customer funded.
Year over year is $4,800 down.
So there's two potential things on there. I don't have it in front of me, but it could be customer deposits that are their service deposit. They're a new customer and they have to maintain a deposit for a period of time.
That's what I think that is.
Yes.
Or it could be what this fund was about customer construction deposits, where the construction is ultimately going to be paid for, a portion of it by the customer. Separate concept.
Yeah, I think what we talked about last time was the more project-based one. That's the one we X'd out based on the conversation. I think the one on the balance sheet, though, is the customer new service. So, we can't, it has to be held in an LGIP or a forward bank account. It can't be invested, because ultimately, at any point, that is repayable to the customer.
That's why I was wondering if it should be actually added on here then, under restricted funds.
No, it has to be, you're saying it has to be in our checking or LGIP, which means it has to be a working fund. And it hasn't historically been segregated.
And it's supposed to be interest bearing and paid out to the customer, right?
It is.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
They're earning interest on it, and then we pay interest to them when they get it back.
Correct. I think. So this is one of the challenges we have. Like let's just use an example. Let's look at the economic development fund, for instance. Let's say you have $1 million in there. how much of that can I invest in long-term CDs, 3 to 5 years, and how much of it needs to stay in LGIP or in this board bank? What's going to make that determination?
So ultimately, almost every one of these funds has to have
Yes.
its own, it falls into this part of the investment policy or that part of the investment policy.
Right. It could be done at that level, or it could be done as a holistic number as well. And then we would realize that, the financial statements that we provide now have all that level of detail. What we would probably do is do one at a fund level, so you can see how much is in each fund, and then there'd be another one that's done at an investment level, that you would know how much of it's invested and not invested, if you will.
Either way works. There's a lot of complexity here. If you do it in the aggregate, then it makes it tougher to time bucket it, because if you're talking about some of these depreciation funds where you could be setting money aside for a significant period of time, you may not want to be restricted to a 1-year investment or a 2-year investment.
Or on the flip side, you maybe, if you did invest it, at least on the high level, you know that fund has that much money in it. And on the backside, we're moving it from an LGIP investment or a CD to help cover whatever project comes up.
Could make an argument either way.
Yeah, Patty and I have had some pretty spirited conversations back and forth on how to make this work and not to be overly burdensome.
Who said accounting isn't exciting? All right, so the what goes into cash on hand, I see where you had that layer. I see where the investment layer is. Let's keep those 2 layers off to the side, and what else do we see in here? Nate, did we get to the bottom of your separating out the customer service deposits?
I don't know. My only thought was in my mind, I get that there's some subjection here that you could change it, but that since it's not really our funds, and it's really is restricted because it's not our money.
I mean, in other industries, you'd have that deposited into a trust account, so to say.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can see the argument for a segregation of it within the working fund. It is cash on hand, but it's also segregated.
But is it cash on hand? Because it's not our cash.
That's the problem, is it's being included in 120, it's being included in the 300.
I see.
And so we're actually using their funds as part of our reserves calculation.
Let me take that
Push
back.
that one.
But no matter how we classify it, Moody's is still going to put it into that.
Yeah. Or it gives us a false, it's not huge dollars, but it gives us a false sense of an elevated number that's not real.
And I think that's what we're really trying to get to. What we're doing here is taking that step of pushing that stuff off to the side to see what we really need.
Yeah.
For that, whatever days we decide it is.
Well, let me take that back, and Patty and I can review it just to make sure we know how it is and what it looks like, and then maybe it'll come back as part of the designated fund that's not part of cash on hand, because it's spoken for by customers.
It seems like the amount continues to grow about 200,000.
Right.
I think if we're going to pull back, this is not in the cash on hand, by pulling this fund and that fund and this fund out, we're going to have to look at those days. So you might as well have that scintillating discussion also between now and next month.
Yeah.
Give us some thoughts and where you come from on those thoughts.
This looks pretty good. Thanks for the work on
This is a big step. Natasha?
I add a few questions to future discussions for this. And part of this comes from Mr. Kapla, what you had said. Who determines the cap for these funds? You know how for like the M1, we have a cap of how much we're going to save. So I think that should be on our discussion list. Yeah, and so we need to put that on our agenda. And then does the PSC have any regulations for these funds? Have we considered any of their regulations when we make these new funds? I don't know. just something to look into. And then also lastly, would we decide a new funding source for the Economic Development Fund? Because this potentially could be really great when we talk about new future projects maybe, but that would be a big discussion as well.
That is a big discussion, and Nick didn't lay that layer down, but a couple of these funds gonna have to have a funding source attached to them.
For sure. Oh, and then also under the Economic Development Fund, it says not for infrastructure replacement, but, so we should also talk about that because we did use commission fund for the lead replacement. So, like we just have to think about, like 30,000.
Oh.
So we just have to think about that, like what we've done in the past and,
Sure.
So that's just part of the discussion.
All good stuff. You got enough for the next one?
Well, let's, if you don't mind.
Got more?
Yeah, just kind of going on the bullets on the memo page. So just from a process perspective, what we were kind of envisioning was that at the end of the calendar year, first part of the next year, February, March, we would try to determine how much cash the utility gained from the previous year. And then, and then we would bring that forward to the commission with a recommendation on how it should be allocated to the funds. I think obviously you could be more prescriptive and say, all right, 80% this, 20% that, but there's so much variability here from year to year. And
priorities could change.
Exactly, there's a lot there. So that was kind of the thought process. And then in the fall of the year, so like this year, our budgeting process will follow like it has in the past likely. Then in March, April, we'll go through this allocation process. Then in the next budget cycle is when we would then label those items that we are going to try to dip into those funds, if you will, to help support, if any. And then that's the process that will repeat itself on an annual basis. Recognizing that during mid-year like this, some of the funds like economic development and others, the commission obviously could make a choice to go ahead and use some funds from that, or for any of them for that matter. However, situations like where we have large outages due to a lot of storms, things like that, or we have a lot more main breaks than normal, that would just flow like it normally does. We wouldn't try to go into a fund to try to help subsidize those. We would just recognize that as either a loss or a gain in the year, and then that would carry over into the allocation of the following year with the funds left over. I guess to your question about investing some but not all, is there thoughts on how, like for instance, if you take the Economic Development Fund, just because I have that one written here, how much of that should be LGIP versus how much of it should be in 3 to 5 year CDs?
We have to pick a nice hard one.
Wow. I mean, I think any one of them is going to have that same question. Because you don't know when you're going to necessarily need it.
That's true.
I mean, that goes back to the question about, do we just make it, this is how the outside looks, but on the backside, the investment strategy is more holistic and not looking at it at the individual fund level.
Thoughts?
The second option seems better or easier. Not looking at individual funds.
Yeah, especially when you're trying to invest and you have a CD that's 250, but you only have 200 or whatever, however it is. Or we're trying to split funds, I guess. We have 200 in this fund and 50 in this other fund. We'll invest both of them into one holding. I'm sure Patty's over there like, yeah.
I think there's going to be some more discussion on that, but Natasha?
But I just think that it would be good, whatever way, but it would be good to, at least on paper, break down the investments. Even if, so that people can look and say, oh, out of the, I don't know what it is, 29 million of investments or whatever it is, oh, this much is depreciation for the electricity, this one is, so that people can parse that out.
So maybe the investment strategy is holistic and not individualized. Okay.
Get some head shakes, so.
So using your concept of the available cash at the end of the year and having the commission do some allocation of it, that's a cash allocation policy that goes with your cash reserve policy. And it might need to be a whole separate policy of how that happens.
Yeah, I think probably one of those things we have to go through at once to feel it and understand it and then write it. And I think, the 120, 300, whatever those days are, once we get those finalized, then that would flow into how the investments are probably handled. Maybe there's some correlation of the 120 is the liquid, and the remainder is could be invested up to 5 years or something.
Since Natasha raised the issue of, the commission would set what the target for these should be. Some of these, like the depreciation fund and the maintenance fund, we're going to be looking to you for an estimate of what those should look like, recognizing that when we start this process, you might do a reserve analysis that says it's X, and we haven't been saving that way for so many years. So it's going to be an unattainable number to start with, but we have to know what the future target number should be. Anybody else have anything on this topic? All right. So we got plenty more work to do on that. And we got lots of thinking as a group on the funding allocation methodology, investment methodology, cash on hand, all the things you signed up for. There was no immediate need that you'd ask that you have on that.
No. I hope everyone's okay with the slow roll here as we're trying to put this together.
And to be fair, but I'd rather take my time and do it right. Number 9, job orders.
Yes, so there's 2 of them tonight for consideration. First is job order 18343, which is line rebuild on Highway PB past Nasonville Dairy. Rebuilding due to some new roadway passing by the dairy. The estimated job order cost is $87,198. And then job order 18347, which is Roman Road line rebuild of 18-pole replacement. This is rebuilding some 3-phase down Roman Road. The estimated job order cost is $124,790. Neither of these projects were initially budgeted. However, there was a project, Elm Street Road, that was budgeted for about $272,000, which was included in the capital budget. So that project will be delayed, and then these 2 will fit in its place, and then it'll allow us some additional $60,000 for other rebuilds that the team's working on.
Is there a motion to approve the job orders?
Make a motion to approve.
By Mike, is there a second? By Gabrielle. Any discussion? Nate, can you call the vote, please?
Sure. Capua?
Yes.
Felke?
Yes.
Tompkins?
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
O'Reilly?
Yes.
Peschel?
Yes.
Ebro?
Yes.
And Miller, yes.
Okay. Job orders passed unanimous. Bills and payroll.
Bills have been reviewed and certified good for payment.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the bills? By Nick. Is there a second? By Gabrielle. Any discussion on the bills or payroll today? Any questions?
I'd just like to point out on page 2 of the prepayments, which is page 2 of the packet, you'll notice a payment to American Transmission Company. You'll see that's for the capital contribution, and that amount is probably it's what we had anticipated, which is about twice what it had been in the past. So just trying to draw your attention to what we discussed previously.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Other questions? Nate, call the vote, please.
Capua?
Yes.
Felke?
Yes.
Am I saying your last name right? I think.
Bulky, it's close enough.
Felke, okay. O'Reilly?
Yes.
Peschel?
Yes.
Tompkins?
Yes.
Miller? Yes.
That motion carries. All right. Number 11, previous meeting minutes. You have the meeting minutes from April 14th. Is there a motion to approve those as they are? By Nick.
Second.
Second by Nate. Any proposed changes? If not, Nate, you call the vote.
Kapla?
Yes.
Falke? Falke?
Yes.
Tompkins?
Yes.
O'Reilly?
Yes.
Peschel?
Yes.
Hebron?
Yes.
Miller? Yes.
That motion passes. Number 12, financial reports.
Included this month are the April cash reports and the March financial statement.
For discussion or information, so if there are any questions, comments, concerns. Natasha?
I just had a question. It was under the cash reports. It was page 7. There was a big cash inflow for sewer. I was wondering, it was $587,000. What?
That's the sewer receipts
The
for
normal
customer
monthly.
payments.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Other questions, discussion? If not, number 13, approval to go into closed session for Wisconsin State Statute 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session for the purpose of discussing wholesale purchase power solutions and Great Lakes Utilities behind-the-meter solar bids. Also, approval to go into closed session per Wisconsin State Statutes 19.851C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility for the purpose of discussing staff update. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
By Paul, second by Natasha. Nate, can you call the vote, please?
Kapla?
Yes.
Falke?
Yes.
Tompkins?
Yes.
O'Reilly?
Yes.
Peschel?
Yes.
Hebron?
Yes.
And Miller, yes.
All right, we will break for 5 minutes while we get ready for